Hi everyone, and welcome back to Drawing What You See. In our first lesson, we experimented with different types of lines and started drawing objects using their primary shapes and forms. In our second lesson, we learned how to add value working from general to specific. In today's lesson, we're going to learn about 3 different types of ways that we can create a real sense of space within our drawings. We're going to do this by creating 3 different thumbnail studies, which are basically just small sketches to plan out a larger composition. Then we'll be using a little bit more time to create a longer still life study that you can finish over the course of the week. Your drawings from today might look something like this. The first thing you'll need to do today is go gather your supplies. You're going to need a pencil, a piece of paper, and an eraser, just in case. We'll also need 3 different objects from around the house. Make sure that when you collect these objects, they're not going to be very fragile because you're going to be rearranging them multiple times. Also, for this type of work, really simple objects are better than complex ones because for our thumbnail sketches, we're going to be drawing really quickly and we don't want to be getting caught up in too much of the details. So go ahead and grab your materials and your objects and I'll meet you at your workstation. Here we are, all ready to go. Pencil, paper, and 3 objects. When we draw from observation, we're trying to communicate something real, something as we see it to somebody else. And as artists, we do this not with language or words, but with shapes and forms. To communicate well, we need to be clear about what's happening in our drawing. And the 3 main ways we can make lifelike drawings are to create hierarchy, overlap, and proportion every time we work. Those words might sound fancy right now, but as we get into the concepts and the definitions of them, they're going to be pretty clear to you, okay? So go ahead and place the objects that you've collected so that one of the objects is back toward the back edge of the table, one is close to the front edge, and one is somewhere in the middle. Doesn't really matter where. So by placing your objects as I instructed, you've created what's called a hierarchy. And hierarchy is just a fancy word for ranking where these objects sit within the rectangular frame of our piece of paper. Objects that are closer to the person, like my hand sanitizer here, are going to be close to the front edge or the bottom edge of my page. Objects that are farther away are going to be drawn up toward the top edge of my paper. Okay? So the top of my paper is going to represent the space just over top of my 409 bottle. And the bottom edge is going to represent the space just in front of my hand sanitizer. So we're going to start our drawing by outlining the edges of our table so that our objects have a surface to sit on. And then we're going to try to draw each of our objects using the primary shapes and forms just like we've been practicing so far. So if you haven't yet, make sure you arrange your objects, and I'm just going to move mine now out of the frame so I can have a better view. Make sure that you arrange your objects one toward the back, one toward the front, and one toward the middle. Okay? The top edge is going to represent the space above, and the bottom edge is going to represent the space below. So start your drawing by outlining the edges of your table, so the back edge of your table. Okay, which I'm going to put somewhere in the middle of my drawing just so that I can make sure I have enough room for all of my objects. Okay, this is going to give us a place to put our objects, place for our objects to sit. Okay, so now we're going to start drawing our objects by outlining the edges, okay, using our primary shapes and forms. So I'm going to start actually with my 409 bottle, which is the one that's farthest away from me. So I'm going to put that at the top of the page. And we're going to go back in similar to how we did with our last few drawings here, our last few lessons. And we're going to start by blocking in the primary shapes and forms. Okay, so wherever it overlaps that back edge of the table, right, you're just going to draw what you see. And again, you can be really sketchy with this. You don't have to draw all the details in yet, all right? You're just using straight lines and trying to get the bottle in as close as you see it. And remember, last lesson we talked about searching lines, right? And that part of the process of drawing is really investigating. That's why we draw, right? To be able to see objects in a new and a different way. So don't get so caught up in whether the outline is really perfect right now. Just try and work your way around and make sure that you're getting that primary shape in. And once you feel confident, you're going to move on to your next object. So I've got this little jar here that's somewhere in the middle, right? So that's going to be in the middle of my page. Starting to make sense, right? So this is how I'm going to let people looking at my piece know that this little jar is closer to me or closer to them than the 409 bottle, okay? So I'm going to keep drawing for a minute, and you can watch me here in double time to get an idea of where you should be headed. Then what I'd like you to do is pause the video and take as much time as you need to complete this part of the exercise with your primary forms, creating a sense of hierarchy, right? Positioning farthest objects toward the top of your page and closest objects toward the bottom. So what I'd like you to do now is flip over to a new sheet of paper. No need to get too detailed with this. We're just practicing right now, okay? So flip on over to a new sheet of paper. And I'd like you to place your objects now really, really close together, okay? So I'll show you over here so you can see. So I'm actually gonna create a little arrangement where all of my objects are touching one another. Okay, so we want each one to overlap one of the other two objects. Okay, so hand sanitizer is touching my little jar here. My little jar is touching my 409 bottle. And I'm going to keep them in the same order. So hand sanitizer is going to go first, right, toward the bottom of my page. The little jar is going to go in the middle, and my 409 bottle is going to go farther toward the back. Set them back over here. So go ahead, pause the video if you need to, and get your objects set up. So what we've just done here by having our objects sit one right in front of the other and have them touching each other is we've created overlap. And this just means that the objects that are closer to the viewer or the artist, right, you as the person who's drawing, they sit in front of objects that are behind them. Right? So they create an overlap where part of the object that is farther away is hidden behind the closer one. So part of the little white jar here is hidden behind the hand sanitizer. So I'm not actually going to draw that, okay? And that's what allows us to create a sense of space in our work and tell people, communicate to people what objects are sitting in front and what objects are hiding behind, okay? So I'm going to start again by drawing my tabletop somewhere in the middle here, so I know I have enough room for all of my objects, okay? And then we're going to go back through our primary shapes and forms. So you're going to be drawing these objects multiple times today, okay? So again, don't get too precious with this. Just go quickly. This is kind of our warm-up for the day, all right? So I'm going to start with my outline, my basic shape of my spray bottle here. It's a little closer to me than it was last time. So the bottom's going to actually come down farther on my page. Here we go. So again, I'm going to keep drawing here for just a minute, and you can watch me in double time to see where I'm headed. Notice how when I start to draw my objects, I'm going to draw as if they're see-through, just so I can make sure I have my proportions correct and the outline correct. But then I'm going to go back in with my eraser and take out the areas of the objects that are hidden behind, okay? And that's going to create a really intense sense of the overlap that we were talking about, okay? So watch me as you need to, and then go ahead and pause the video and take as much time as you need to complete this part of the exercise. Blocking in with primary shapes and forms, and then really starting to see where those objects overlap and sit one in front of the other. So even though I can't see in reality, right, with what I'm looking at in front of me, even though I can't see this side of my little white jar, I'm drawing it in nice and symmetric so I can make sure that I have the right form going on, okay? So that's what I meant by drawing as if things are see-through. It's as if everything in a still life is made of glass. And then I'll draw right back over the top of it to get my hand sanitizer bottle in the right spot. All right, so you'll see that I worked through the process of creating overlap by putting one object in front of another, in front of another. I drew see-through so I could see and make sure that I knew exactly where and how my objects related to one another, right? Because they have to relate to one another like they do as I see them on the table. And then I went back in with my eraser and I took out those extra lines so I can no longer see through my objects. And this is what creates a really, really deep sense of space, right? Basically, these 3 different steps, well, even 4 with the tabletop here, right? 4 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4, moving back farther and farther into my drawing each time, okay? The last thing we're going to focus on today is what we're going to call proportion. And when most people look at objects that we see every day, like apples or teacups or hand sanitizer bottles, my 409 bottle, right? We have a good idea of what size and shape they should be in relation to each other and in relation to us as human beings. So when we combine these objects into a realistic drawing, we have to make sure they all work together and make sense to whoever's looking at the drawing. And this is what allows our drawings to be believable, okay? So what I want you to do is really look at the objects you've chosen and start to make comparisons, okay? Is my hand sanitizer bottle smaller than my little white bottle in the middle here? Is it 2 times as small as the 409 bottle, right? So I can kind of use my pencil here as a little bit of a ruler, okay? And don't worry, we're not doing math here. You're just gonna kind of count how many times this bottle here goes into your spray bottle. So it's 2 times and just a little bit, okay? And then check out on the objects in front of you. Is it 2 times and then just a little bit? Yeah, pretty close. So I know that my drawing's pretty accurate, okay? So we're not gonna start a new drawing here, but what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to go through and start measuring a little bit and see if you've got your objects in proportion to one another. Are they relating to each other in your drawing the same way that they are on the table? Okay, so let's take, we already did height here, right? I said my 409 bottle is about 2 and a little bit taller than my hand sanitizer. I checked that in front of me and that seems to be correct. Okay, let's do width. So take your pencil and take an object in your still life, doesn't matter which one, and let's do the width. So the pencil tip is going to go at the farthest extent at the left and your finger is just going to pinch your pencil at the farthest extent on the right. Okay, and then you're going to say, okay, that's the width of my hand sanitizer bottle. Did I do this correctly? Okay, so let's do 409 again. So the widest part of my 409 bottle, I'm going to start to measure once and twice and a little bit. Okay, cool. So then I'm gonna go out here on my objects and do the same thing. Lay my pencil right up against that object. 1, 2, and a little bit. Perfect. Okay, so now I know that my 409 bottle makes sense in that the size that it is compared to my hand sanitizer bottle. And what a lot of artists will do is they'll just keep going around and around and around their drawing, right? And start measuring smaller and smaller parts of their drawing, okay, to make sure that everything lines up the way that it should. Okay? So that's what I'd like you to do now. Go ahead and pause the video and check every single object to make sure that it fits in line and in proportion to the objects that you have elsewhere in your drawing. Okay, so go ahead and do that now. All right, so now that we've checked the proportion of our drawings and we've found that everything is correct, if you found that something is incorrect, you can make some adjustments as you go, okay? We're gonna think back to what we had done in our previous lesson, adding value, okay? So what you're gonna do is you're gonna start to block in those shadows that you see that your objects are casting, okay? And depending on where the light is in your drawing or in your composition here, the shadows might change, all right? So you're gonna draw those in just like you drew your objects in, okay? First starting with your primary shapes and forms, and then you can start to notice where the shadows might be a little bit darker, closer to the object, and where they might be a little bit lighter as they travel away from the object across the surface of your table. So go ahead and draw those shadows in, and you can be really sketchy with those, okay? And to finish up this drawing, we're just going to start putting some value in with your cross-hatching, your scumbling, or your blending, okay? So wherever you see dark, add some darks in. Wherever you see lights and brights, you can leave the white of your paper. So I'm going to keep drawing here for just a few minutes. You can watch me in double time if you need to. And then when you feel confident, go ahead and pause the video again and take as much time as you need to add some value. The very most basic values, lights and darks to your drawing. Okay, so you can draw as long or as short as you like and bring your drawing up to the level that you want it to be at, okay? And you might have noticed as you watched me draw that I started to be really careful and pay attention to the values as they sit next to each other, right, in relation to my overlap, okay? So value has a lot to do with space as well. And where I created a darker value behind and a lighter value in front, that edge of the hand sanitizer bottle really comes forward. I did the same thing here, right? But because of the way that light hits the objects that I'm drawing, this edge on my small white jar actually ended up being darker than the edge behind it. So there's more than one way to create a sense of space in your drawing, okay? So light to dark or dark to light, depending on what you see in front of you. And you also probably saw me use my eraser to go back in and add a couple highlights in. You're more than welcome to do that at the end, and that's a really great way to pull the objects towards you, and then adding a little bit more value in the shadows will start to push things away. Okay, so As you continue to draw this week, what I'd like you to think about doing is rearranging your objects one more time with all of the things that we've learned today in mind, okay? And then you can work on a little bit longer drawing like we did at the end here, using all the things that you've learned so far. So if your objects are more complex, work from your primary shapes and forms, right? And then layer your details over the top as we did in our first lesson. Then you can start to add some value in like we did today, okay? Remember, you can return to these videos as many times as you like. You can pause and play them again if you need to draw along with me as you work. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'll plan to see you next week.